now. Let's talk about what is going on in the Middle East. Fascinating developments and pretty worrying developments too. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has threatened direct action against the Houthi rebels over their targeting of cargo ships in the Red Sea. There's also an awful lot of talk about how much it might cost the world economy. Remember when the Suez Canal was blocked a few years ago? Well, joining me now is Bob Seely, Tory MP, and also a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Good morning to you, Bob.
Morning, Julia. Happy New Year to you and your listeners and viewers.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I want to talk to you also what's happening in Gaza, talk of Israeli troops being withdrawn, but it is interesting what's going on in the Red Sea in terms of these. We've got these Houthi rebels. They're funded by the Iranians. Everyone seems to be got a heck of a lot of missiles. They've been targeting ships in the Red Sea, heading towards the Suez Canal. Loads and loads of shipping companies, cargo companies, decided to now reroute to go around the Cape of South Africa to avoid this. Huge cost to the economy, 2-week delays. We're told there could be, food and goodness knows what delayed and the cost of the economy there. But there's also this much bigger risk of this whole war in Gaza escalating out of control, isn't there? How concerned are you?
Well, it's a risk. About 12% of global trade goes through the Red Sea because it goes up through the Suez Canal. So if you shut that off, you have a big impact. And I think what the Iranians are trying to do is internationalize the whole Middle East crisis again. And they're trying to use the Houthis as proxies to attack global shipping, but also potentially the alliance, the naval alliance in the Gulf as well. So it's effectively a second front in the Gaza-Israel conflict without necessarily bringing in the proxy group Hezbollah, which are based in Lebanon. So I think that's their plan. There have been about 100 attacks since November. We need to take action because we need to keep shipping safe. But at the same time, there is a risk that we get drawn in to a wider conflict with Iran. But I suspect at this point, we've got to push back against Houthi attacks on international shipping.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Again, we dealt with piracy on the Somali coast. That was a massive big issue. And insurance costs, again, it's all passed on to the rest of us. But the stakes are much higher. And it's very clear. Look, this is what Iran wants. They want there to be... I mean, they want this sort of existential battle, don't they? They want this war. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, sort of stepping in, saying, look, we're considering these sort of attacks on the rebels. We know we wouldn't be doing it without US backing. Well, that will drag us in. But realistically, can we deter the Houthi rebels from making these attacks? They are incredibly well funded. They are incredibly, highly militarized. They are a jihadi group. It's just another jihadi group in the Middle East. I'm not quite sure how we do deter them.
Well, you can deter them by put it bluntly, killing their members and destroying their kit. So if you do that, if you take military action, you're going to have an effect. If you leave it as it is, Julia, they will eventually start to sink some big commercial ships in the Red Sea, and they will effectively close off the Red Sea to international trade, which is not a good thing. And there are potentially 4 seas in the world: South China, the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea, all of which have significant geopolitical tensions around them. So blocking off international trade routes is not a good thing. We don't want to see it happen. At the same time, there is clearly the potential for escalation of this problem. So it's always with these things a balance of probabilities. If the Iranians want to draw us in, this is a very good way to do it. But if you push back hard, you deter the Iranians and the Houthis from trying their luck. And you've got to remember, a lot of these big ships are armed anyway because they have armed guards on them. So they have some localized defense. What we're doing is providing extra layers of that defense and giving forewarning, the ability to shoot missiles down, the ability to sink Houthi ships, the ability to target Houthi logistics, supplies, etc., etc. So there is a logic for doing this. And I think on balance, it's something that probably needs to be done. But clearly there are risks.
Yeah, indeed. Let's also talk about what's happening in Gaza. There is still ongoing concern about the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who've basically, most of them have been evacuated from their homes, forced to leave because of the Israeli bombing in the wake of the October 7th massacre. People being destitute, being bombed still, access to food and water, aid supplies are really still very, very limited. Real concern about what's going on there for the Palestinians. particularly the huge proportion of children. But we hear that Israel is now planning to withdraw some troops from Gaza. They say to re-energise its economy. What's going on there?
I think the Israelis are going on to another phase of their operations, in which case they're going to be slightly less personnel dependent, and they're probably more focused on finding small units and individuals from Hamas rather than the scale of the operations which we've seen thus far. I suspect they're also somewhat reacting to growing international pressure that is saying to them, look, this is not proportionate. You have the right to defend yourself, but the amount of civilians getting killed is effectively out of all proportion to your target. Now, that's a very difficult thing to argue because it's quite a technical argument that you're making, because you shouldn't be killing any civilians at all, but you have to claim for major targets under international law, you have more leeway, sadly, when it comes to proportionality, because you can say this is a really important target that can help justify harming civilians.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to tell you, I'm
sounds.
sure you know better than me, Bob, that, you know, people die in wars. I mean, actually, again, there's lots of talk about, you know, Israel carrying out genocide in Gaza. Israel has the military might to carry out genocide in Gaza if they want. We are looking at, you know, tens of thousands of people who've died, many of them children. This is an absolute tragedy for every single one, apart from the Hamas fighters. I'm delighted that they're dead. I'm glad the world is a better place without them. However, the reality is, you know, it's not a genocide. You know, if you look at the number of missiles that are being fired, you know, thankfully, the death toll is too high, but it could be a lot worse.
No, Julia, OK, you make a very good point. The argument of genocide is just trite and silly, and people who use it are just using sort of slogans and sort of virtue signaling.
I mean, they're lying.
There is, you're right, but there is a significant issue about proportionality. And once you're hitting thousands of civilian deaths, which is almost certainly taking place, and I know that one shouldn't believe that what the Hamas health ministry in the Gaza Strip says, I take what they say with a very, very large pinch of salt. But there is a significant issue about the level of proportionality. And that is an issue in itself. But it is also very damaging to Israel's long-term relationship with other Arab states. And I do think it is something that actually the more pressure gets put on Israel to think more carefully about our proportionality and bring down very significantly the amount of civilian casualties and children's death, I think it is a much better thing, both for Israel in terms of war crimes, but also in terms of its relationship with the rest of the world.
I accept your point, but I also think Hamas perhaps should think more about civilian deaths, because they actually want more civilian deaths. Can I just ask you, I know you have to go, but I want to ask you briefly also about what happens to the Palestinian people, because there's basically talk about, you know, Israel is no longer willing to accept having Hamas in control, quite rightly, in the Gaza Strip. What's going to happen to these 2 million people already displaced, I mean, 2 or 3 times in their lives? Talk of Tony Blair, bearing in mind, you know, he was, the Middle East, you know, a mystery, of Tony Blair being involved in negotiations to relocate Palestinian refugees from Gaza. And I've got to say quite clearly right now, I don't want any coming here, thanks. I don't want a single person, not one. But there are an awful lot of Arab countries who profess to care desperately about the plight of the Palestinians. I mean, you know, 2 million is a lot of people, but there's a lot of countries with a lot of space. Where are these people going to go, and is Tony Blair the man to do it?
I'm not sure that Tony Blair's the man to do it, but let's see. There's a great deal of hypocrisy in the Arab world about Palestinians. There's great sort of professions of support, and then much less in practice. I think we're going to be stuck with a UN-style governance of sorts, just in order to get food aid in to stop people starving. How you rebuild Gaza in future, I do not know. But I think just moving people around the world and having it effectively pushing people out of their homes is not a long-term solution. So I don't know. But I think what we're going to see in the immediate future is some kind of emergency UN governance in Gaza in order to actually stop people starving to death.
We shall see what happens. Bob Seely, so appreciate you joining us, Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Thank you for that. Tom Slater, who's editor of Spiked Online, is still with me in the studio. Let's just focus on what happens in Gaza with the Palestinian refugees first. Because, I mean, these people don't want to be displaced. They want to stay where they are in Gaza. Well, actually, many of them would like to go back there. I mean, half the population is under 18. They don't even know anywhere else, but go back to where they were displaced from previously. I mean, look, these people have a terrible plight, and even the ones who support Hamas, I can understand if you were in those circumstances, you would support Hamas. If you're living in that existence. But is the solution to actually just move all of those people and evacuate them to other Arab countries?
I mean, as you say, it's a desperate situation. You've got a lot of people in a very small amount of space suffering a tremendous bombardment. But of course, we do have to remember the reason that they've been subject to all of this anyway is that they're led by lunatics and theocrats who want to target civilians, who treat even Palestinian lives with absolute contempt. Obviously, everyone wants a conclusion to this conflict which is both soon, peaceful, allows people to be in their homes and so on.
A ceasefire is not a conclusion, unfortunately. It's not.
Not when you're dealing with Hamas, but I'm talking about, obviously people want the civilians of Gaza to be able to live a life and to flourish and so on. What we do need to recognise is that who they are led by, the people that we're talking about, need to be got rid of. That has to be non-negotiable. That has to be the starting point, I think, for anything that goes forward. But I think the problem that we have in the West is that there is this waning understanding of that, waning support for Israel, waning memories of what happened on the 7th of October.
And
I think that clouds a lot of what's
still people querying what actually happened on October the 7th and how many people died and the women who were mutilated and murdered. I urge everyone to read, it was a New York Times piece last week with talking to some people, witnesses to what happened. I mean, you need to have a stiff drink afterwards and a bit of a lie down to. But it's important to know it, and it's like not saying, "Oh, I don't want to know the details of the Holocaust." No, you need to know it. You need to know it and believe it when the evidence is presented to you. You've still got many people we know who we're thinking about who just think, "Well, we don't have all the evidence." Me too, except when you're a Jew. Is a
apparently
tagline.
If it didn't happen 5 foot in front of them, they don't believe it.
Yeah, exactly. It is extraordinary. So we do need context. I'm really concerned about the Palestinian people in Gaza, but I think it's fascinating that a lot of the people who profess the concern don't actually want to do the things that would make them safe, which is get rid of Hamas. Every single Hamas fighter dead. Sorry, they are a danger to other people. The world is a better place without them.